otherwise known as M6 Turbo Racing in France, and Car and Driver presents Grand Tour Racing 98 in America. Total Drivin is probably its most well-known release title, as there is not one single French or American track in this game, and also outside of NASCAR, circuit racing was never really a thing in the States. They're lost because some of the best racing games ever made are circuit racers. But then again, PAL Region never got NASCAR Rumble, one of the best Mario Kart clones ever made. So swings and roundabouts, I guess. The game was developed by Eurotechnics and published by Activision. Total Drivin allows you to take control of 5 classes of race car, including buggies, sports cars and rally cars. There are a total of 6 different countries to race in, with multiple track variations for each class of car. Here's some other racing games that came out in 1997. Formula 1 97, Destruction Derby 2, TOCA Championship Racing, and let me tell you, Total Drivin actually fits in with this crowd. Though the best option is an actual steering wheel, analog controls are just better than digital controls for racing games. You feel that you have more control over steering because you actually have something that resembles torque with an analog stick, whereas with digital you're just pressing a button and therefore have to press more buttons if you want more nuanced turning. Everything is fine for the most part until you reach a sharp corner, because let me tell you, drifting is not an option in this game, as the amount of oversteer is ridiculous when it comes to using the handbrake. Even the AI couldn't help but oversteer and cause the occasional free car pileup. Funny to watch, but also evidence that the physics needed a little more work. Total Drivin just feels its age and doesn't control as naturally as you would want from a game that presents itself as simulation light. Having said all that, Total Drivin is dated, but it is not broken. A half hour or so with the game, or any other fine example of a pre-analog racing game, is enough to understand the quirks and be able to drive the cars as they were designed to be driven. It also helps that the loading times in Total Drivin are near non-existent, and if you do find yourself wiping out on a sharp bend, you can restart the race in a matter of milliseconds. I can't remember the last racing game I played on the PlayStation that had better loading times, to be honest. An example of fine coding or my lack of experience with PS1 racing games. Only time will tell. There is not much variation with each class of car in terms of how they feel to control, apart from the obvious differences in speed and weight. It is most likely due to all the tracks being flat and not providing enough of that bumpy terrain which makes rally racing what it is. Despite all the tracks feeling samey to drive on, they do have variety in backdrops, colour palette and weather patterns, which makes all the tracks interesting enough to at least go round for one spin. However, it should be noted that some of these tracks are doozies when it comes to certain bends, so a little trial and error is to be expected. There is also a neat, though some would call typical, techno soundtrack. Yes, pretty much the majority of racing games on the PS1, and that is a lot of racing games, had a techno soundtrack and really is of its time. This is because electro music is fast paced and just works well with the gameplay, and Total Drivin is no different. If you love drum and bass, then you'll probably love this soundtrack too. I actually ended up having a lot of fun with Total Drivin on my second try, nearly overshadowing my first impressions completely. The dated drift mechanics are something to get your head around. It is still impressive though, as Eurotechnics created a game that still holds up to this very day, at least in my opinion. Total Drivin cannot decide fully whether to be a simulation or an arcade racer, so instead chooses to be half of each and ends up becoming a racer with uber Euro 90s presentation and simply unbalanced controls. You get the hang of them, but full concentration is required when approaching these corners because the AI can be quite unforgiving. Total Drivin is an odd combination of Ridge Racer and V-Rally, but it is a bright and vibrant looking game with a fitting techno soundtrack and challenging, if at times completely frustrating gameplay. It won't hold your attention for long, but I do recommend seeking it out, as it is emblematic of PS1 racing games made in the transitional period between Ridge Racer and Gran Turismo. And also you can pick it up for like £5 on eBay, so you know, we gotta lose. Max Power Racing, otherwise known as C3 Racing, Car Constructors Championship in other European territories, is another racing game, again by Eurotechnics, just a year after Total Drivin, and was published by Infogrames. If you didn't know, Max Power Racing is a licensed title. Max Power was a British magazine based in Peterborough, focusing on the performance, tuning and car market. It ran from May of 1993 to January of 2011. It was a big deal apparently, big enough for Eurotechnics to be interested in a licensing deal. The success of Gran Turismo increased demand for such a thing, so here they are. Though you can't change colours, which is a disappointment. First, starting up the game, you come across a FMV that is straight out of 1998, with random text popping up amidst what might be the motion picture equivalent of white noise, with multiple filters, picture in picture in picture, all colour corrected by someone who seems to be half blind. It brings on a mood, let's just say. After that, you are introduced to a very minimalist menu UI featuring bold white text on a black background, as well as beefy sound effects to bring the message home that this is a big boy racer. A little side note, Max Power Racing has widescreen support, which wasn't common for the time. From what I could gather in my research, less than 50 games in the entire PS1 library supported widescreen, and even less for the N64. So it's got that going for it, I guess. Max Power Racing came out in a post-Gran Turismo landscape, where all of the PS1 games were trying to match, or at least meet halfway, its sense of realism. Much like Total Drivin exemplified the awkward transitional period from arcade to simulation for PS1 racing games, Max Power Racing exemplifies the swift change in tone to more realistic and grounded gameplay experiences, mainly from the fact that officially licensed supercars are racing on the kind of terrain they have no place being on. Analog controls. They're jank. I never got how anyone could play a racing game where you move the analog stick to accelerate. It just feels wrong. Digital controls are more preferable for me, at least. It plays like a more fine-tuned, more weighty version of Davalex's London Racer series on the PS2. Now that sounds like an insult, but some of these games were actually quite fun racers. The issue with the London Racer series was the excessive asset flipping and extremely frugal presentation, things that don't describe Max Power Racing. Simply put, way better handling than Total Drivin. The tracks feel good to drive on, they are balanced well to give a great sense of acceleration, as well as provide a few tricky turns. Can't restart if it falls into the water, just like Total Drivin, and is just as annoying, especially in championship mode. Also, there are certain tracks you can only play at night, which means you can't often appreciate the vistas of these exotic locations. I can understand nighttime tracks being more of a challenge to the player, but some of these tracks you can only play at night. I only complain because some of these backdrops are incredibly scenic and some of the skyboxes are simply beautiful, like the ones that are set during the magic hour. Death by lava and nighttime tracks are by no means game-breaking issues, but they are distracting factors. Max Power Racing features another great techno soundtrack. In fact, it is even better than Total Drivin, with tracks like Life in Mind and Paralyzed Paradise featuring some great vocals. Rave culture and gearheads went together like, I don't know, vodka and ecstasy. The soundtrack fits in perfectly with the Max Power brand and completes this boy racer package. It is one of the better soundtracks you will find in a PS1 racing game, and that is saying something. Total Drivin and Max Power Racing are two good PS1 titles that, despite only being a year apart in age, reflect two very different periods in racing video games. Despite digital only controls, they are still both fun to play, as well as feature a ton of late 90s charm if you're into that. As both these games never really sell for more than £10 on eBay, I could not see why someone wouldn't want to add one of these to their collection as the other racing game on the PS1. Thank you for watching, please like, comment and subscribe, and goodbye.